Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to go over the best legendaries in my opinion for all the healer specs in Raid and Mythic Plus. In previous videos, I've mentioned various legendaries, but there's been so much tuning over the last couple months that I thought it would be a good idea to make a video like this. In the future, I'm going to come out with guides for each of the individual healing specs I play, where I go into great detail as to what legendary you should craft first, and what other legendaries are useful in different situations. This video is just meant to be a preview to talk about what you'd expect if you're playing some of the various specs, or just to get a preview of what's going on and how the beta looks right now. So I'm just going to jump into Wowhead's recommendations for legendaries, and then I'll give my thoughts as to I think if there's anything wrong or what's going on. So for Resto Druid, this is the one I played the most. They recommend Memory of the Mother Tree for Raid. It gives a 50% chance after Wild Growth to give you a proc that will spread your next rejuve or regrowth to 3 more targets. In my opinion, this is overall the best healing legendary, and as a first legendary to craft, I think it's a good choice. There are other options in Raid if you don't want to use Memory of the Mother Tree because it will be less useful in arenas. However, for specifically Raid, I think this is a good choice. Some runners-up include the Dark Titan's Lesson, which gives you 2 life blooms. This one is actually comparable in HPS, but it's much harder to use. You have to maintain the 2 life blooms all the time, and you have to be using all the clear casting procs that you get. Most of the benefit that you get from Dark Titan's Lesson, which gives you 2 life blooms at once, comes from utilization of the blooms from keeping them up and the clear casting procs. For Mythic Plus, they mention the Life Bloom Legendary and Memory of the Mother Tree. For healing, I think Memory of the Mother Tree is strictly better, and I wouldn't be using Double Life Bloom for Mythic Plus. Double Life Bloom doesn't add a whole lot of throughput, and most of the efficiency, as I said, comes from the mana that you get, and mana is less of an issue because you can drink often. Other runners-up for Mythic Plus, however, are damage legendaries. So you won't always need a legendary to heal, and if you can bring something that speeds up the dungeon, that's always an option. So if we look in the Druid legendary powers right here, a couple notable mentions are Circle of Life and Death. This is just a flat increase of damage over time and healing effects. However, it makes them shorter as well. So with high amounts of haste, you can have more damage through Sunfire in your hots, but with low haste, this isn't going to see that much value because your hots and dots are just going to run out. You're not going to be able to maintain them fast enough. So this is a legendary that I think could be useful later on in the expansion when you get lots of haste, but isn't super important right now. The other one that I think worth mentioning is Balance of All Things. This has pretty neat interactions with Convoke and Balance Affinity along with some of the Night Fae Soulbind conduits in the tree. You can do crazy amounts of single target burst damage with this. Again, this is something that we would use later on in the expansion, maybe at the end of the first season or later on just for more damage, but it's not something that you would craft first. Okay, now we'll look at Mistweaver. So for Raid, by far the standout option is Yu'lon's Whisper. It's a great efficiency legendary that gives you a burst heal to everyone nearby when you use Thunder Focus Tea. Thunder Focus Tea is a free spell. It's not on the global. 30-second cooldown, so you're pressing it over and over and over. This is just going to give the most throughput in Raid. You're not going to have to think too much about it as long as you're near your allies. For Mythic Plus, you have a lot more options. If you're focused on Raid, you can absolutely bring Yu'lon's Whisper in as well. It's still going to do nice AoE healing, but you can use some of the other legendaries if you choose. So looking at the Monk legendaries, there is Tear of the Morning, which gives you essentially enhancements on your Renewing Mist. It improves your Vivify and Enveloping Mist healing, and it also makes it cleave more. So this is a good option for priority healing. It's not going to do quite the same HPS as Yu'lon's Whisper. However, it's going to be more on-demand healing, so this one may be preferred. Another option, Ancient Teachings of the Monastery, is a great option for in situations where you're looking mostly to DPS. It'll do passive healing. You don't have to press any healing abilities to make use of it. So I think this one will be nice when it's low damage input, although Yu'lon's Whisper might be okay for that as well because you're still going to be pressing Thunder Focus Tea to empower your Rising Sun kick. The last one I wanted to mention, Fatal Touch, reduction of Touch of Death by 2 minutes. This could be a very solid legendary. I think it'll honestly probably do the most damage of any legendary. However, I don't know how useful that damage is. For example, if there's a pack of 5 mobs and you touch of death the lowest health mob, you're not actually saving time in the dungeon, but it does do a tremendous amount of damage. Next, we'll look at Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin and Raid is one that I'm not super familiar with. So right now your options are Inflorescence of the Sunwell and Maraud's Dying Breath. Both of them are not super appealing. The Infusion of Light legendary is good because it synergizes with a conduit that makes your Holy Light cleave. So you're using that conduit build with Inflorescence, I believe is the top throughput legendary option right now. Although if you're making use of Light of Dawn and Light of the Martyr, Maraud's Dying Breath is an alternative as well. One problem with Holy Paladin is that both of these legendaries don't carry over to Mythic Plus. So if your main focus is Mythic Plus, then these aren't going to be too much of use for you. You may need to wait and craft another legendary down the line. Honestly, all the Holy Paladin legendaries are pretty lackluster for Mythic Plus, and I think now that Crusader Strike mana is fixed, this is one of the biggest problems. The leading option right now, from what I've seen, is Relentless Inquisitor. This gives you haste every time you spend Holy Power, which, even though it's a Ret legendary, you can use as Holy. So this is nice to have to just give you a constant haste buff, because not only will this help your damage, but it'll also still help your healing a little bit, albeit not as much as some of the other legendaries. Another option, depending on the tuning on release, will be one of the generic legendaries. I'm not going to go through all of them in this video, but during the beta there's been a couple generic legendaries that have worked well for damage. For example, the ANR one I think was the most recent, and then before that was Vitality Sacrifice. Both of those options could be good if you're looking at these legendaries for Holy Paladin and thinking none of these are really great, let me just do something that brings big damage. Alright, next we're going to look at Holy Priest and Dispriest. So for Dispriest, the raid option is Clarity of Mind. This buffs Spirit Shell, increasing the duration of active atonements and reducing the mana cost of all your spells during it. This is really, really strong. Dispriest is actually very strong in raid right now, and a lot of it revolves around Spirit Shell, putting up a huge ramp absorb shield right before incoming damage. So not only is it's a really strong 1 minute cooldown that you'll have, but it's also something that you don't need to worry about timing as well, because you can just get that absorb shield up and you'll always get huge benefit as long as you're getting that absorb shield out before the damage comes. So there's some speculation that Spirit Shell or somehow this synergy might get nerfed for raid, but I'm not really going to play the guess what gets nerfed game. I'm just discussing what's in the game right now. Dispriest is in a similar spot to Holy Paladin in that you have very different legendaries for what you use in Mythic Plus and Raid. You don't use Spirit Shell at all in Mythic Plus, and the throughput of Rapture is amazing in Mythic Plus anyway. You don't really need anything to boost it. So you're looking for a legendary that's going to help your damage or somebody else's. Right now, the leading option, Twins of the Sun Priestess, gives you power infusion when you give it to somebody else. Power infusion is incredibly strong in Mythic Plus. You might not realize it when you're playing with less organized groups or when you're still learning the class, but when you use power infusion on a really solid DPS player when they're using their big cooldowns, they're going to be doing huge damage. Even though it's not going to show up on your meters, you're going to be contributing so much damage using power infusion. Twins of the Sun Priestess allows you to get that effect on yourself. So not only are you increasing your own damage overall in the dungeon using this, but also you're making it so you can always cast this power infusion on your allies. Whereas before, if you're not using this legendary, you may have to decide, do I want to use it on my mage or do I want to hold it because this moment's going to get tough here? But with Twins of the Sun Priestess, you just throw it on the mage. You also get it. It's boosting your damage. It essentially just gives you an extra haste buff every 2 minutes. They mentioned that the Pentient one is an alternative. Personally, I haven't really liked this one. Penance is very weak, and on top of that, you have to be using Power Word Radiance to get this buff. To me, this doesn't seem very good, but if you're less experienced or you're playing in pugs where you can't make good use out of Power Infusion, you may choose to use this one. However, I think you should just get good at using Power Infusion. So next we have Holy Priest. I'll be honest, this is the only healing spec that I don't play a lot. I asked around, and so far the main option for both Mythic Plus and Raid is Harmonious Apparatus. It essentially reduces the cooldowns of your holy words, and those are strong, I guess. Sorry, I don't know a whole lot about Holy Priest. I'm not going to try and talk about like I know them, but I just want to mention in this guide that I did talk to some people. I looked through a lot of streams, and it does look like this is correct for Holy Priest, and it's nice that there's crossover between Legendaries for Raid and Mythic Plus as well. And last we have Resto Shamans. Right now they're recommending Primal Tide Core as the legendary for Raid. This gives you a free Riptide every 4 casts. Riptide is a super mana efficient spell. You're going to be using this on cooldown, so this is going to give you the most throughput of anything else. Also with the Necrolord Covenant ability that's creating Riptides, putting more Riptides out and cleaving with those Riptides is going to be really, really strong. One thing to note, though, to look into the Shaman Legendaries is, although this might be the highest throughput, it may not be the best option for every fight. I think one notable alternative is Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem, the Mana Tide Totem Legendary. Even though this one isn't going to be as strong for throughput as the Primal Tide Core, this is going to be more focused healing when you need it. This is going to turn Mana Tide Totem into a cooldown. When you cast it, your cast time of Chain Heal and Healing Wave is reduced by 50%. So you're going to be able to throw out tons of Chain Heals during your Mana Tide Totem, which is going to essentially turn it into a strong healing cooldown. So although Primal Tide Core, over the course of a long raid fight, is going to be doing more healing, Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem is a reasonable alternative because generally raids have really heavy amounts of burst damage in certain times, and if your raid is struggling with a certain moment, having a legendary that gives you more burst healing is an option. So for Mythic Plus, they recommend Chains of Devastation. I actually kind of disagree with this one from the testing and the testing that I've done and the Resto Shaman gameplay that I've watched. Primal Tide Core is an okay option for Mythic Plus, so let's say you're primarily focused on Raid. It's totally fine that you bring this into Mythic Plus as well, you're not trolling or anything, but I think there are some better options. As I mentioned, Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem is a great cooldown, and using this legendary gives you essentially cooldowns for every single pull as a Resto Shaman, sometimes even 2, between Ascendance, if you're talented in that, your Mana Tide Totem, Healing Tide Totem, and Spirit Link. You're going to have really, really strong cooldowns for almost every single pull. And on top of that, you have your Covenant ability, whichever Covenant you choose, probably Necrolord at this point. So you're going to be able to pop huge cooldowns on every pull and do a ton of healing. I think Resto Shamans are one of the best, not overall healers, but just talking about healing output, Resto Shamans are really strong right now. Another alternative is Jonat's Natural Focus. This is kind of an interesting one. It doesn't have a lot of carryover for Raid, so I don't know if you'd want to use it. However, it is really good for long drawn-out fights where mana efficiency is an issue. It makes it so your healing waves are boosting your chain heals. So when you're using a lot of healing waves throughout the fight, you're trying to stay mana efficient. On top of that, it's making your chain heal stronger, so it's overall just increasing mana efficiency. Before, that wasn't really an option. You would just use Spirit Walkers, but now that Spirit Walkers only reduces the cooldown by 25%, I think Jonat's is actually a little bit better for mana efficiency. And we'll talk about a couple more. The Earth Elemental one is actually pretty fun in low keys that does Earthquake on the Earth Elemental. However, in high keys, your Earth Ele is going to die too fast, and this legendary isn't going to do enough damage. Riptide having a chance to activate Ascendance doesn't seem great. 7% is just too unreliable, so it's really hard to make good use out of this when you need it. Chains of Devastation is the most interesting one and talked about. I think a lot of people either love it or hate it. What it gives you is it makes it so your Chain Heal makes your Chain Lightning instant cast, and then if you cast Chain Heal next, that's instant cast, and you can cycle back and forth. The issue is that it doesn't actually improve efficiency because Chain Lightning is such a not good spell. You never want to be casting Chain Lightning, so even though your Chain Heals are instant, you're losing any efficiency that you gain from having to cast Chain Lightning over and over again. Even if you just sit there and use Flame Strike or Flame Shock and using your Lava Burst procs and then Chain Healing in between, you're going to be doing the same amount of healing and probably even more damage. What this does give you, though, is mobility. So before you write this one off saying that it doesn't give anything, it gives you the ability to constantly use chain heals and DPS on the move. And in certain maybe affix weeks and dungeons, or maybe on a raid fight or two, this could actually prove really useful. So number one, this is really fun, and if you want to play it, just play it, but it's not that great for efficiency. However, don't write it off yet. It does have, I think, some unique uses, and you may see people pulling it out in certain spots. All right, so that covers my preview, overview, opinion of every single legendary for healers. Again, I'm going to go over each healer in way more depth in a guide video over the next couple weeks, at least the ones that I'm playing. So look out for that. This is just meant as a preview to get an idea of what's coming. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel. As I said, I'll be coming out with guides for healers as well as dungeons and raid bosses over the next few weeks, so stay tuned for those. Happy keying.